Hello, and welcome to the Fintech Times podcast, focused on discussing the latest fintech topics and trends from around the world. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report all the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world.
Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be talking all about fintech for good. So established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a digital global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. So firstly, I'd like to say a huge hello to our online audience. Thank you so much for joining us today as we are going to explore what good fintech can really do. So this idea of fintech for good often makes an appearance in the industry a lot at the moment specifically. But what does it even mean? So fintech by its very nature exists to solve problems and can utilize their abilities to think outside the box and fast track innovation. Financial technology companies can actually do a world of good for business, consumers, and even the planet. Whether it's offsetting carbon or providing services for the unbanked, this webinar is going to explore what doing good actually means and try to understand how fintech is making a difference in society. Our fantastic panelists are going to examine why the fintech industry is in the perfect position to do good and determine once and for all whether fintech for good is the latest industry fad or if it's here to stay. So we have some fantastic guests for today's discussion, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Amber Skinner-Josephson, CXO of EPOP, Jason Capehart, Head of Data Science at Mission Lane, and Antti Apponen, co-founder and CEO of People. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting us.
Fantastic. I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to have today. I feel like fintech for good in all its forms is such an interesting topic and one that's got so many different layers and facets to talk about. But before we jump right into the discussion, I'd love to have each of you just give us a brief introduction to both yourselves and your companies. So Amber, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm Amber. As you said, Polly, I'm the Chief Experience Officer at EPOP, which stands for Electronic Proof of Purchase. So this is a green fintech in the payment space. We're really focused on taking paper receipts and making them digital. And by doing that, extracting a new level of SKU or item level data from receipts, aggregating that and then serving that up to retailers to be able to better target customers, talk to them better, in a more efficient way, and tailor their offerings to the local surroundings and to their audiences on a much more granular, more effective basis. Before this, I was the CEO of a consumer lending and alternative credit scoring fintech based here in London. So that big focus of that organization was to reach the unbanked and provide alternative credit scoring that completely went around the traditional credit bureaus and credit agencies to give better access, more access to credit for the unbanked in emerging markets, a bunch of different utilizations of this technology, but it all centered around alternative credit scoring.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Jason, going to you next.
Yeah, and I kind of share some background with Amber here. I'm the head of data science at Mission Lane, and what we focus on is to find ways to build fair and clear financial products for working class Americans that have often been marginalized or excluded from the current financial system.
Amazing, thank you so much. And then last but not least, Antti, going to you.
Hey, my name is Antti. I'm a co-founder and CEO of People. We are a regulated non-bank consumer financial services company, fully operational in the Middle East and Africa. And we are trying to solve the problem that about 800 million people in this region have a smartphone and internet connection, but they don't have payment cards that work for online payments. So every time they get this screen that says, please insert your card number, they're stuck. So our purpose is to fix that problem.
Fantastic. Well, it's so great to have you all here today. I'm really excited about the discussion we're going to have. And I think we should just really kick it off with something super high level. And what does fintech for good even mean? You know, I feel like there's probably a lot to unpack here, but fintech for good, what does that even mean to us? Jason, I'm going to ask you to answer that one first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when you ask what's fintech for good, the first thing that I think about is good for who? And well, I think we all look at this and say we have new digital technologies, and in some cases, things that are not that new, that are Web 1, Web 2, right? Some of these things that are now a decade or two old that are still just starting to change financial services. And I think that the reason when we talk about fintech for good is because we're all looking at these new technologies and wondering how we might be able to use them to change financial services to make it better for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. But Antti, anything to add on that one?
Well, we come from, we're extremely purpose-driven and very, very human. We feel that in addition to functional shortcomings, the hundreds of millions of people in this region have because of lack of access to services, we feel it's even deeper, it's emotional, it feels really bad, it feels wrong, it feels unfair that everything we do in our daily lives, watch Netflix or listen to Spotify or order an Uber or anything that requires a payment card, there's 800 million people who can't do that. If you're a father and your son asks you, hey, can I borrow your card number? I need to buy a new skin in my, Minecraft. And you say, sorry, I'm your father. I'm not entitled to a payment card. Can you imagine how bad that feels? So we're sort of also almost entering the area of sort of financial/mental health that we can fix by fixing really small, simple things that we can do with a bit of technology. So we sort of are strong in that angle as well.
Really interesting. Amber, what do you have to add?
Yeah. Well, I think when I think back at kind of the original fintech, so financial technology, and I used to work at Swift, which kind of coins itself as one of the originators of financial technology. I think, okay, that was very infrastructure and system based. When we think of fintech as we think of it today, being very consumer facing, the kind of large promise was democratization of access to services that would change people's lives. And if I look today in 2022, do I think, did that really happen? With the fintech that we hear more about, the kind of neobanks, et cetera, has anything fundamentally changed in terms of people's day-to-day lives? So I have a current account or a checking account at this bank. I still use a card, et cetera, as opposed to that bank. Does that change anything really in terms of my quality of life? Maybe not. So when I think of fintech for good, I think it's very simply enabling more people, so greater share of the world's population to get further. So when I think about things like access to banking services for the first time, if I think about access to microcredit, to enable people to get further, whether that's building their businesses, their micro businesses, whether it's opening a banking account for the first time, whether it's having access to things like things that rule all of our lives in the Western world, from beginning to from morning to night, having access to a card number, for example. So enabling more people to get further is, for me, what fintech for good really means.
Yes, my next question is, why is there such a focus on fintech doing good? I feel like more and more in the industry now, especially from sort of my point of view, being a journalist in the space, it's kind of all we're talking about, fintech for good. How can we do good? How can we do good? Why is there such a focus on it? And I guess why now is there such a focus on it? Antti, why don't you answer that one first?
One thing is that it's been researched all over again. It's financial matters are really, really important and fundamental to human beings. You can do bad things as well. Get people to become overly indebted or buy something they don't really need. Vice versa, you can really do good things. It starts from small things. You go to Africa, if somebody had $5 or $10 more in the morning in working capital, they can buy something, they can resell it during the day, they get the cash in and they pay back the loan. And the next morning they have $12 to start the day with, and then it's $14. And it just by enabling those things, you can change economies. So I think it's probably medical sector and financial sector that really can do some good, and then of course the whole environment.
That's an interesting point you raise, Antti. Like it can be quite negative. I know like money is sort of, it's the root of all evil, isn't it? In some views and things like that. So it's interesting that fintech, which is so heavily tied up with money and finances, can also do good. But Amber, what did you think on this?
Sure. In terms of like, if we're looking at a macro view, why now? What's the timeliness of, the resurgence of fintech for good in the news, in everyday conversation, et cetera? And I think, of course, we have the ups and downs of what's going on in economies right now. And if we look at fintech, which is really billed as, or was and has been, an alternative, a better, cooler, faster alternative to traditional financial services. And then we look at things like the cost of living cost of living rising, inflation, et cetera, things that are going on. And I'm of course strictly, speaking about Western media. And then we juxtapose that with, is actually this cooler, better, faster alternative that we thought we were having, is that living up to what we collectively would consider to be the potential of this other system? Or is it basically the same rails with a different facade? So I think, in light of climate action, top of the agenda, other social issues being top of the agenda, it's a natural question that we're asking in terms of back to democratization of access to these things, these tools, financial tools that should be life-changing in many ways. Is that actually happening? Is that shaking out? And that's from just a macro level. I think that's why we're hearing a lot about fintech for good right now.
Fantastic, Amber. Thank you so much for that. Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I really agree with what Amber and Antti are talking about in terms of the themes here. My feeling is that the reason why we talk about fintech doing good so much now is because we're excited and we're nervous, right? Ultimately, anybody who isn't part of the top 1% of winners in the current financial services system looks at fintech or the possibility for advancement and say, like, is this something that's going to change my life or the system in a way that's going to feel more fair to me? It's going to help me be more successful. But by the same token, right, we all know technology is usually a double-edged sword. There's nothing about new technology or innovation that ensures or guarantees a better outcome. And so we have to ask ourselves these questions. What if we allow fintech to make financial services more intrusive or more biased and more discriminatory? We have to keep an eye on these things, and it requires focus to keep ourselves in the industry on a virtuous path.
Absolutely. I think all three of you have raised some fantastic points there. I guess sort of following on from that, we've kind of touched on it very briefly already, but what is it about fintech that makes it in the perfect place to do this good? Why fintech? What is it about the industry that that makes it in the perfect place? Amber, what did you think?
Sure. I think a couple fundamental things. There are myriad reasons why I think that fintech is in a perfect position to really do good in the world, be it environmental, social, etc., access. But fintech, and I've worked in fintech for a while, which I know these other two speakers have as well, Jason and Antti. I think fintech, we're able to move faster. And that's a big deal. Like I said, I worked in some big, large organizations that just have decades and decades of legacy. Tech debt is like, don't even talk about it. Just the ability to move, pivot, and try something new. You cannot there's nothing comparable to fintech in many ways. And of course, bigger institutions have capital behind it. Until recently, capital has been pretty free-flowing in the fintech industry as well. Another thing that I think is really important is the ability to bring people on board, utilizing technologies and innovative technologies that exist, like telecommunications, for example, technologies that exist, but the application is new and different and riskier. So those two things, again, there are lots of reasons, but I think those two things are big ones that make the whole of fintech really well positioned to do things that leave a lasting, good, fantastic, positive mark in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you've said there. Jason, do you have anything to add?
I think one of the differences I would draw would be that, right, it's quite an overstatement to say fintech is in a perfect position to do good for the world, right? At least in my opinion, right? Make no mistake about it, fintech is in the challenger position, right? There are established, whether you think of them as banks or legacy financial services companies, that are absolutely in a more powerful and more established position. And it's going to be, the onus will be on fintech to, right, prove that it provides something above and beyond the way that the current system works. However, I will say, right, I absolutely agree with Amber, right? Ultimately, you see, like, there's a lot of exciting things coming together for fintech right now. You have the technology that we've talked about. You have investors, you have even governments that are interested in thinking about this, like, wait, what can this do for my citizens and for consumers? And you have all these different, right, often opposing groups, or at least groups that don't always collaborate, coming together and looking at this as an opportunity. You know, a great concrete example of this for me is that you know, here in the United States, 10 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about fairness in financial services, and especially with credit decisioning, outside of potentially redlining. And now you see a ton of great academic research, which enables interest from consumer advocate groups and consumers themselves and the press. You see that prompting regulators to be interested. You have these groups of fintechs who look at this and say, this is a workable problem, and this is something that can be done to change financial services for the better. And you can't actually make progress on that problem of fairness and credit decisioning unless you get all those groups. You need researchers, you need advocate groups, you need regulators, you need industry insiders. They all have to work together to do something different. And that's never happened before, you know, not in the last 50 or 100 years of financial services. And, you know, if you look at the last 5,000 years of debt, you would say it's been a long time since we felt like, you know, that aspect of finance was fair and equitable.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Jason, and one that I'd maybe not considered myself. But Antti, throwing it to you. Anything to add on this?
You know, maybe the only part that where sort of the fintechs and traditional financial institutions really differ is of course the business model. So banks, financing sort of companies, they live off by accumulating assets and then lending them and issuing mortgages and sort of printing money on a retail banking level and so on. That's their life. They don't really make money from facilitating things, whereas the technology companies like us, we don't lend, we don't accumulate assets, we don't invest somebody else's money. So we need to figure out a way to fix some other problems. And I'm not saying they're bigger problems, but they are different ones, like to ability to make a payment, for example, or these classic ones that we are seeing massive increase right now is the whole Web3 world. How do you, if you want to get into the crypto world, how do you buy your first crypto coin? Like, if you don't have a bank account or credit card, you can't, you're out of that world. And technology companies like us, we can unblock it, we can just fix it. and we don't need to issue mortgages to make a living. So it's just different. It's complementary, and we can move fast.
Amazing. Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I think moving on then, we've already given some great examples, but I mean, let's just sort of get on to how can fintech do good then? And more importantly, I guess, how is fintech doing good already? It would be great to, get some examples and case studies. And, I guess, is it just about sort of providing people with like bank accounts, or is it more than that? What do we think? Jason?
Well, if you ask a question like, oh, is this just about giving people a bank account with a better app, right? I would say no, it's the opposite of that, right? That this is something that we think about all the time and talk about it at Mission Lane, is that we often think about the way that traditional financial services works as you can kind of think of it like an auto shop, right? They will sell you all the parts, right? Here's a bank account, here's a credit card, here's an installment loan, here's a mortgage. And if you are someone who has the knowledge and the time and the money to put all those things together, you can make it work for you. But that's not a problem. That's not solving a problem for the customer, right? Especially when you think about regular working class people. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, like today I'm going to go out and I'm going to get another fraction of a percent better in my savings account. Nobody wakes up in the morning with that problem, right? They wake up in the morning with real problems, right? Am I going to pay for my medicine, or am I going to buy groceries this week? How am I going to fix my car so that I can get to work, so I can earn my paycheck? Like, these are real problems. And so I look at it, and I think that this is not unique to Mission Lane. This is a lot of the emphasis on the customer and the customer experience that exists in financial services, where we say we want to focus on the real needs and the actual problems that somebody has in their day-to-day life. And we're going to try to solve those problems, not just provide the parts. We want to, we want to sell them the car, right? We just want to be able to get in, turn the key, and move on, go get where you need to go and move on with your life.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's, completely accurate, Jason. Fantastic. Amber, what did you think to this one? How is fintech doing good?
Sure. I think there are two poles. One is, we've mentioned this, many times already in this conversation. So to better equip more people to gain a foothold in life, in building their wealth or having access to financial services. Another one that I think is really important is just you don't have to cut this out either. Proliferation of choice, just simply choice, to enable people to have a better say, more of a say in how their participation in financial markets affects them, the world, social issues, causes, things that are important to them. I think that's one that's really important. In terms of case studies, there are so many case studies. Two that really strike me are one around access to putting people on the map in terms of, do they exist for the financial world to see? Having a credit footprint, for example. And Auntie, you talked about this is something that's relatively easy for us to fix in technology companies, regulated and unregulated. So how do we leverage everyday data points? And people are generating, everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a smartphone. We're generating data all of the time and constantly. How can consumers leverage that to mean something to them in their everyday lives? So, I've done a lot of looking at in the past few years at how we can take that and turn that into credit scores or something meaningful for emerging populations where credit bureaus don't exist, and how do you lend, if that's not the case, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one case study that's super, super interesting. Leveraging things like telecommunications networks for lots of different financial purposes. They already exist. People are already using mobile phone data, trading data as currency, lots of different applications there. And then the other one is access to capital markets, just completely lowering the barriers to access to fixed income in equity, just capital markets, being able to invest your money. That's no longer a super frightening thing for a lot of populations that were previously completely blocked from accessing these services. So those are two applications in kind of generic case studies that I think are pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And then Antti, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think this whole concept of let's give everybody a bank account. It's kind of strange. It's like if you were a telecom operator going to Africa 5 years ago, it's like telling yourself that everybody needs a fixed line telephone connection. That's not the case. Their problem, they just want to communicate. Give them a cell phone and an internet connection, and they can WhatsApp and problem solved. So the same thing is, why would you force a bank account on somebody? Well, what's the real need they have? So they don't have access. They don't have a place where to store money. They don't trust the bank. So that's not a place. Where do you put it? Under the pillow? If you have a little bit of extra money, how do you invest that? You can't buy stocks and shares and funds from European markets if you're in Angola. So how do you do that? If you need to borrow a little bit of money, who's going to lend it to you? Some guy in a village with a 40% markup on it. Those are the problems. And then the solution is not to give them a bank account. It's just to give them what they want. And this is what we're seeing. They just want access to the Web3 world. They want DeFi and they want a stable coin to move money from their high inflation local currencies to USDT or whatever that is relatively more stable. And then they have suddenly access to DeFi. Well, they can borrow, they can lend, they can invest, they can stake. They can do everything we do, but they just don't use the traditional financial methods to reach the same outcome. So I think that's why it's real what the tech companies are doing in the financial space.
Yeah, and right. One of the things that I look at and say, but be concrete for me. Like, what do you mean? Like, is fintech doing anything? Like, how do you point to something that this industry has done that makes a difference for a consumer? Well, I said, 10 years ago, did you want to look at your credit score that determines what neighborhood you can live in, what job you can have? That privilege is going to cost you $70, which is a lot of money for most people. Now you can get a credit score for free and lots of different services online. Lots of financial services companies now offer that just as a free add-on service, right? That is a huge step forward. And I don't think anyone who kind of grew up in that world of like, oh, I can get my credit score anytime you want, can ever really appreciate the fact that used to be a little bit mystical of like, what is this thing? How does it affect my life? What does it mean? How do I improve it? And don't get me wrong, there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of transparency and availability there. But let's also, allow ourselves to be a little bit happy that this is a better place than we were. And it's the same thing when you look at some of the improvements, in my opinion, or at least in terms of the products out there, to write Amber's points of like, part of what fintech is doing is providing choice, it's providing options and the opportunity for people to go other place with their finances is checking accounts. There are now lots of places that offer checking accounts without insufficient funds fees. Insufficient funds fees are bemoaned and pilloried for a very good reason. And you can see that the choice by some companies to find ways to provide checking accounts to people who don't have great deals of wealth and asset, to provide these checking accounts without insufficient funds fees, right? It puts pressure on other legacy institutions to then try to compete and do the same, or to be pressured by other groups to say, if these companies can figure out a way to make a product and run a business in a way that isn't directly harmful to the consumer's financial health when they are their most vulnerable, why can't you?
Yeah, I think you've all raised really valid points. And I suppose if you like boil it down to a super basic level, as you guys have all been saying, it's all just about removing the barriers. It's about giving access to the products that people need. And I think that that's super important. And I guess moving on, this is sort of maybe perhaps a more negative side of things, maybe playing devil's advocate here. But I thought this would be a really interesting thing to talk about, and that is this idea of fintech for good. Is it all a PR stunt? You know, we hear a lot about like greenwashing in the environmental space. Is good washing a thing? Or, you know, these companies actually genuinely trying to make a difference in the space? I'd love to know kind of what you guys think on this. Antti, I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, ma'am, I can only speak on behalf of our team here at People. What keeps us going is when we get reviews that we helped somebody. When we create a few million smiles a month, you know, that keeps us going. So it's to us, it's much more important than anything else. But then there's data just to, when we look at our card transaction data, for example, sort of one of the top categories is remote education in Africa. So there's courses, there's coding courses, there's certifications, there's you put and market your own music on streaming sites. It's people learn, they build something because they got a 16-digit card number, and that's pretty amazing. So at least from our side, it's far from PR, it's our daily life, and it's very, very satisfying.
Fantastic. Amber, what about you?
I mean, I've worked in marketing and comms for most of my career, so I would say, is good washing a thing? Yes, sure. Just like greenwashing is a thing. Yes, of course. What does that mean? How do we think of that in the absolute? Yes, that's going on. But in very real and very meaningful cases, just like in Antti's case, that is not the case. There are companies, lots of companies with a genuine desire to affect change positively in the world. And what I'm seeing when I talk to different portfolio startups is the metrics that they're using and the acceptance of these, what maybe 5 years ago would be alternative metrics around customer wellness, things like mental health. How do customers feel about, and what is their relationship to finance? Using those as success metrics, that's become much, much more acceptable. So in that instance, or in that case, I think it doesn't combat exactly good washing, but for me, that's a very, very positive trend.
Sure, absolutely. And then Jason, what did you think?
Ultimately, to add on to Amber, there are genuinely companies out there who are trying to not just run a sustainable business, but to do something beyond their own, at least short-term interests. Do anything good, there are always going to be pretenders. There are always going to be imitators. It's going to be a PR stunt for some people, and even for someone like me and maybe the other panelists as well, right? In the short term, it can even be kind of hard to tell for industry insiders which one of these are real and which one are they not. You see by actions and progress over time. And so I look at this and I'll say, in the long run, the tide will eventually go out, and then we'll see who's swimming naked.
I think that's a really great way of putting it, Jason. Yeah, absolutely. My final question to you then is a bit broader, but what does the future hold? Where are we going with this idea of fintech for good? What's going to come next? Amber, I'm going to ask you first.
That is a very, very broad question. And I just wrote down a couple of thoughts. I think there'll be more of a drill down on finding innovative solutions that bypass traditional finance. So that's one, be it payments, alternative class investing, so crypto, for example, even access to credit. One thing I think is definitely going to, we'll have to harness, okay, there's data being created all the time. I mean, it's how we harness data to create truly bespoke and personalized solutions and profiles and solutions for particular customers, all customers really. I think we'll get much, much better at that. Harnessing all of this, data that's being created into making meaningful solutions that are very, very specific to customers and doing that dynamically.
Amazing. And then Jason, the same question to you.
Yeah, I don't know what the future holds. I will say that I think that regardless of how successful fintechs are, that it seems hard for me to imagine the future won't be some version of a lot of financial services products being cheaper, safer, and easier to use. Maybe it's the case that things will change course and fintechs will look different in the future, but it's hard for me to imagine that they don't in some way become a front end or an interface or the customer facing aspect that connects the rails and the warehouses from a banking perspective that we have today, and is that intermediary layer that allows more compassion and more connection to the consumer.
Thank you. And then Antti, over to you.
To us here in the sort of Middle East and Africa region, it's let's say next 3 years is relatively clear. This is the world's fastest growing e-commerce and app market in the world, and all of those, not all of it is free. Some of it you have to pay. Currently, people don't have payment mechanisms that work for online payments. And then at the same time, the same region has the highest inflation in the world. So every morning you have less money than last night. So that just creates these fundamental needs where to park my money in some kind of a stored value way. There's going to be so many different players in a complementary manner fixing the same fundamental things. Being here, we don't sort of need to invent problems. We just need to keep fixing them one by one, and we'll be busy next 10 years doing that. So I think to us it's relatively clear.
I love that, Antti. I think that's a fantastic line to end on. We don't need to invent problems. We just need to keep fixing them. I think that's brilliant. Unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much to our online audience for tuning in. If you want to carry on the conversation, you can follow us on Twitter at the Fintech Times and use the hashtag Fintech Times Fintech for Good. And my panelists, thank you so much for joining me. Jason, Antti, Amber, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you, and it's been really interesting to hear all your insights. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we see you again very soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Fintech Times podcast. We hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Don't forget to check us out at thefintechtimes.com and subscribe to our monthly publication to keep up to date with all the latest fintech news.